Merci, cher président, cher Enrico. Quand j'ai reçu votre invitation, je pouvais pas dire non parce que moi, j'ai agrandi avec cet espoir quand il y avait la discussion dans mon pays ou d'entrer dans l'Europe ou de rester dehors. Pour ma génération, il n'y avait pas de choix. Moi, j'ai fait beaucoup des années, beaucoup des activités pour choisir d'entrer dans un groupe de pays qui a fait de toutes nos vies une transformation inexplicable à ce moment-là. Mais aujourd'hui, ça que nous prenons comme garantie, comme on voit dans l'Europe, les pays de quoi je vais parler dans mon discours, n'est pas toujours, et ne peut pas toujours être pris comme d'office. Alors, chers représentants de l'Institut Jacques Delors, mesdames et messieurs, chers Européens, je vous remercie de m'avoir invité aujourd'hui. Le sujet d'aujourd'hui fait l'objet de discussions depuis plusieurs décennies. L'Institut Jacques Delors a joué un rôle central dans l'évolution de ces débats, comme vous avez dit, cher Enrico, aussi maintenant. Ces contributions se sont appuyées sur le travail d'experts, ajoutant des facettes supplémentaires à la conception riche et complexe dans ce que l'on appelle aujourd'hui la mode de vie européen. Et pourtant, lorsque les chars de Poutine sont entrés en Ukraine le 24 février, le débat a pris une toute autre reality. I stand here representing the lost generation of the European Union to vaguely remember a world when democracy was constantly under threat. Anybody younger than me knows only peace. Putin's war on Ukraine has been a wake-up call on what I would say is the failure of our collective memory. We had grown so comfortable with the idea of a free and democratic Europe that we had forgotten that there are some, including on our borders, that think that there shouldn't be a future for democracy at all. Our collective judgment as a response to growing interdependence between the world's nations, whether that relates to our economies, our climate ambitions, or even the provision of energy supplies. This has been clouded by naivety. A naivety that led us to believe that Europe's way of conducting business through dialogue and exchange would naturally extend to our hostile neighbors. Now, the warning signs were there. The Baltic countries, Finland, Poland have been warning us for years. We saw the backsliding of democracy in Russia, hybrid attacks on our democratic processes, what happened in Crimea, what they did to Navalny, how they tried to crush democracy in Belarus. And yet when Putin's revisionist ideology was matched by his army, we let it be surprising. It should not have been surprising. Ukraine and its people have been battling a brutal and illegal war now for 129 days, excruciating days. As Russian bombs continue to kill indiscriminately, as the Russian army continues to rape Ukrainian women, as millions of Ukrainians have fled their country and will continue to do so, Ukraine is today looking to Europe for support. And they look to us, and this is a question that we must ask ourselves and the responsibility that we grant ourselves. They look to us because they are not only fighting for their homeland, they are not fighting for their homes, but they are fighting to preserve the values that underpin our way of life. When we talk about freedom, when we talk about democracy, when we talk about the rule of law, these are not words that can be just cast aside when it no longer suits us. We have maybe done that because we took them for granted. But Ukrainians today know, and they've known for a long time, perhaps even before we could admit it to ourselves, that our European project is the largest force that stands in the way of Putin's revisionist past, of spheres of influence, vassal states, and an Iron Curtain. So on the 24th of February, we woke up belatedly to the realization that Ukraine's fight is Europe's fight. So last week, when the European Council took an unprecedented decision to grant EU status to Ukraine and also to Moldova, this has become a watershed moment for European integration. I remember when I was a law student, and it was at the time when the Nice Treaty came into power, 1st June 2003. Our European law exam was on that day. So we all expected a question in the exam. What are the changes that will be brought about by this treaty? And then again, when I was doing my master's in European law, same question, what would we be discussing? But in both exams, there was one question. When you look back, what do you think will be in the history books on European law in 10, 20 years? I think we should ask that question today. And I have no doubt that what happened last week, which was not at all taken for granted, or even if I think not only back to January when I started my mandate, but even to 5, 6 weeks ago, I would not have thought that Ukraine and Moldova would today be candidate countries of the European Union. Why did we need to do that? And I was around that table last week in the European Council. Again, I thought that this would be something that would be more difficult to get through. In the end, there was an understanding immediately around that table that we needed to prove to Ukraine, to Europe, to our citizens as elected representatives, but also to the world, that no decision is too difficult to take when our values are being called into question. And if we see that and address it whenever we have crucial moments like this, and not focus on what divides us, and not take the instinct like we did at the beginning of the COVID pandemic of closing the borders after years of trying to open them as though we thought a virus would stop at a police border check. But that was an instinct that we took. And then it took us months to say, no, Europe is needed. When we talk about where the gaps are, we filled those gaps with unity and in more integrated development and policymaking. Because this show of unity, as it strengthened us during the pandemic, has now strengthened us in terms of our geopolitical security situation. And it has also strengthened Ukraine and every country that looks to Europe as that bastion of protection and democracy that it has always was. The next steps will be crucial and difficult, very difficult. War fatigue will inevitably set in. But this is where it is our responsibility to ensure that we do not become complacent. And this is why we must double down on our efforts to support Ukraine, while also taking stock of this fundamental shift in geopolitics. And this is why we must look at the way that we engage with autocrats and where we should change the way we engage with them. Because our founding mothers and fathers worked too hard to forge a system to make any return to the horrors of war impossible. It is up to us to defend the rules and values-based order that we stand for. And that means that we need to cement an interdependent relationship between nations and people who are proud of their differences, but at the same time who understand that in this new world, the future can only be forged if we are together. And that means that we have to understand that interdependence is inevitable, and that we also need to grasp our responsibility in international fora. The responsibility is on us. We can no longer, as Europe, say somebody else can do that. If something happens in the world, another continent, another power can come in. Because what we have seen is that either that other power didn't come in, or any other irresponsible or unpredictable or autocratic powers come in with malign thoughts and ideas as to what they can do with countries that are waiting to join the European Union and have been waiting for decades, even though they've been promised year in, year out, elections have been fought and lost on this in those countries, that the door would be open to them. So the onus is on us, the responsibility is on us to define the rules, principles, and values that underline the way that we engage with other nations and the way those other nations engage with us. Because if it is not us, it will be somebody else. As Jacques Delors himself famously put it 30 years ago, if we are to resist the forces of fragmentation, protectionism, and exclusion, we must be more than just aware of our interdependence. We must move on and manage it, setting common objectives and applying common rules. So, ladies and gentlemen, a new paradigm must set in, whereby the European Union must own and shape its own destiny, irrespective of the threat to our east. We must be ambitious enough and courageous enough to develop a long-term strategy, one that enables us to take a quantum leap to protect our values. And that unity that we have exhibited as a union and beyond must remain our blueprint going forward. Nous ne devons jamais oublier le pouvoir qui a l'Europe de transformer des pays et des vies. Notre projet de paix européen est peut-être imparfait, mais il a inspiré et a permis d'obtenir des changements que beaucoup pensaient impossibles. Au fond, notre Europe, c'est une question d'espoir, l'espoir en l'avenir, l'espoir de voir nos libertés prévaloir et l'espoir d'avancer et d'inspirer le changement. Je sais que nous pouvons encore avancer et je sais que nous pouvons encore inspirer. Je vous remercie.